Welcome to Talk Nation Radio, a half-hour discussion of politics as if the people mattered. I'm David Swanson. I am delighted to welcome to Talk Nation Radio this week Lacey Kohlmoos. She is the Senior Field Organizer for Global Trade Watch at Public Citizen. She is also, as all good people are, an alumna of the University of Virginia. And the website that you'll want to take a look at is tradewatch.org. Lacey Kohlmoos, welcome to Talk Nation Radio.
Thank you for having me.
So we are having you on to tell us about something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What is that?
Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or what we call the TPP, is a free trade agreement currently being negotiated behind closed doors. And it's been negotiated for over 3 years over the course of 16 rounds of negotiations.
And what countries would be in the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, there are currently 11 countries negotiating the TPP. The United States, Canada, Mexico, Peru, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam. But Japan is expected to sign on within the next couple of months. And also the TPP is designed to be a docking agreement. So if it is passed, then any country on the Pacific Rim could join on as well, if they agree to the terms laid out in the TPP.
They would have to be on the Pacific.
Right.
But this could become a treaty with many, many nations in it.
Exactly, including China, Russia, Indonesia, the Philippines.
And what's the timing? When might this become law?
They are still negotiations, and we never know for sure, but the Obama administration does have plans to finish up negotiations and sign on the U.S. to the agreement this fall.
I recall when candidate Obama was running for president, and there was a big labor union rally with the primary candidates in the Democratic Party 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. A few of the candidates, like Congressman Kucinich, said they would throw out NAFTA and start over. And all of the others, including Barack Obama, said he would fix NAFTA. He would redo it. He would put in labor rights and environmental protections. Is that presumably what they're coming up with for the Pacific? Starts out that way. It's good for people and labor and the environment. Is that what it's looking like?
Unfortunately, that isn't the case. The TPP does not meet the high hopes that we had for a new 21st century global trade agreement model. But it is NAFTA, the same NAFTA we've had since '93, NAFTA on steroids.
How so?
Basically, the TPP is not about trade. There are 29 draft chapters. Only 17 of those draft chapters deal with non-trade issues, such as food safety, health, environmental, and other policies. And these policies do not, raise things to the highest common denominator, but bring things down to the lowest common denominator in terms of reforms and protecting workers' rights.
And so in terms of jobs, for example, is this an agreement that produces jobs, keeps jobs in countries where they are, or offshores them and eliminates them?
The TPP would actually incentivize corporations to offshore jobs by including NAFTA-style terms that would give special benefits to firms that relocate investment and jobs overseas. The TPP would actually guarantee firms a minimum standard of treatment by host countries, and if those corporations feel that the host countries haven't given them that minimum standard of treatment, then they can actually sue. Those corporations can sue nations' governments. They can circumvent domestic courts and take their case to a global tribunal where their case will be heard.
We've had a lot of trouble with corporations masquerading as people, having voting rights and speech rights and so forth. This sounds like corporations masquerading as nations. Corporations can actually take nations to court when they don't like their laws under this agreement.
Exactly. It's not just about raising corporations to personhood, but to nationhood.
And giving special benefits to corporations that offshore jobs, not that import jobs or create jobs as job creators, but that offshore them. Am I understanding that right?
Yes, that's correct.
What about other issues like food safety? Is this helpful or harmful?
It is pretty harmful. Safety standards on imports for food and products are considered a trade barrier in the TPP draft language. So basically, the U.S. could be forced to import food and products that do not meet U.S. safety and health standards. And also, food labels are actually considered trade barriers as well. So under the TPP, we would not know exactly where our food is coming from, and they would not meet the health and safety standards of the U.S.
What about environmental protections? You'd think this would be an opportunity to take a huge chunk of the world's nations and agree mutually on environmental protections on a level playing field and benefit all concerned.
Yeah, you'd think so, but it actually doesn't. It does the opposite. When I was talking earlier about that minimum standard of treatment, a lot of times corporations don't feel that they've been treated with the minimum standard of treatment because their host country has implemented policies or laws involving environmental reforms or safety and public health policies. Corporations claim that these types of policies, especially when it comes to the environment, limits their expected future profit. So that's how they actually sue the companies. The companies sue the countries because those environmental reforms have eaten into their expected future profit. So in many cases, if a country does pass environmental reforms, these corporations can actually pressure them into rolling back these reforms. And sometimes countries, just the actual threat of what we call investor-state enforcement system, which is the corporations being empowered to sue nations, that they're so afraid of this investor-state enforcement system that they will shy away from any environmental reforms that they think might kind of scare corporations.
Presumably the same governments that are negotiating and passing an agreement like this will simply refrain from creating environmental protection standards that the agreement would quickly eliminate.
Exactly.
Presumably, people in each nation, whether out of enlightened belief that our grandchildren should have a world to live in or out of xenophobia, are going to be upset about foreign corporations coming into your country and then suing your country because it doesn't allow them to endanger your health to the extent that they'd like.
Exactly. It's really disturbing. And there has been already over $365 million paid by countries out of taxpayers' pockets to corporations. And under the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and CAFTA, which is the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and the Peru Free Trade Agreement, there's already about $13 billion worth of corporations' claims that are still pending.
On another angle of health here, usually when these agreements get made, the drug companies manage to get rich somehow. Is that the case here as well?
Yes, it definitely is. The TPP is really the most secretive trade negotiation in history. While the press and public don't have access to the proposed text, and it's really difficult for members of Congress to see the text, there are over 600 corporate advisors that not only have access, but actually influence the text. And these include Big Pharma. So they've been taking care of their own interests. So under the TPP, the big drug companies would get longer monopoly patent terms that would allow them to charge whatever they want for medicines. It would also set new limits on access to drug safety test data, which means that when the patent is ended, when it finally ends, that generic drugs could not even be produced, which does bring down costs of medicines greatly, especially for HIV/AIDS medications. The TPP even has a proposal to establish new restrictions on cost-saving drug formularies. It's really disturbing, especially for those working in the HIV/AIDS arena.
Has anyone tried to calculate the potential death and disease and injury and suffering from an agreement like this one?
I'm afraid we don't have that data yet, but we are expecting that this will result in loss of life.
I mean, some of us spend our days advocating against wars, and wars are such obvious killing. They're direct, violent ending of lives. But an agreement like this that imposes lower health standards and denies medicine to people at some point is going to begin costing lives in potentially huge numbers, is it not?
Yes, that's exactly the case.
I guess the one other thing, if I could imagine the worst possible treaty that nations could come up with, the dumbest thing I could think they could stick in there to make it even worse would be more bank deregulation. Has this got that too?
Oh, yes, it is. Financial regulations are considered trade barriers. So basically, if passed, the TPP would undo all of the work we've done to make sure that there won't be another global collapse. For example, governments would be unable to ban risky financial products and services. They wouldn't be able to impose it on the size of firms, so we don't get that too big to fail corporation. And it would not allow governments to ban the use of speculation taxes and capital controls. So basically, the TPP would be a get-out-of-regulation-free card for the financial firms that, wrecked our economy.
So while our government or some parties of our government and other governments around the world may be talking about financial reform, and Senator Bernie Sanders has a bill to break up the big banks and so forth, our government is simultaneously pushing through an agreement that would end up forbidding our government from breaking up monopolies and regulating banks and banning the sorts of products that famously crashed the economy. Is that actually what's going on?
Yes, that's exactly true, because every signatory country must conform their domestic policies to TPP terms. So this global agreement would trump any national or state-level laws here in the U.S., as well as in the other TPP signatory countries.
Unlike the UN Charter and the Geneva Conventions and other international treaties that don't seem to trump anything. We're speaking with Lacey Kohlmoos, who is the Senior Field Organizer for Global Trade Watch at Public Citizen. The website is tradewatch.org. So all of these disasters we're talking about are if and only if this thing passes. And as you say, it's now being negotiated in secret with 600 corporate advisors helping the United States out, presumably none of them elected or accountable to you or me. How do you and your colleagues manage to know what's in this while it's being negotiated in secret?
There has been a few leaked texts coming out, so that's how we've been able to see that this is NAFTA-like, except it's NAFTA on steroids.
Do you know who the advisors are, these 600 people?
They include representatives from global banks, offshoring corporations, big energy companies, and big pharma.
So the worst elements in this potential agreement, are those coming from other countries and the United States representatives are pushing back, or is the United States in fact the force for ill here, pushing to make this treaty even worse?
Every negotiator is fighting for specific issues in their country. The U.S. is fighting to include these policies as well. For instance, I'm sure everyone remembers the Stop Online Piracy Act, SOPA, which was stopped by the massive amounts of public outcry. U.S. negotiators are pushing for a copyright chapter that would replicate the worst of SOPA. This is something that the U.S. negotiators want to happen.
SOPA being a bill that was resisted and blocked in Congress by massive public as well as certain corporate opposition, would now be put through quietly, secretly, through a treaty rather than a law legislated by our more open government.
Right. It would be pushed through a trade agreement, and people don't really know that this is happening.
They certainly don't. So those who think this is a good deal or a mixed bag, what are the upsides? I haven't heard anything good yet. That's when someone makes an argument, if they're even compelled to do so, for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, what do they say?
Well, they say that it would increase exports. What they don't say is that a trade agreement like this would dramatically increase imports. And if NAFTA is what we're looking at, the imports increased at a higher rate than the exports did. So while it would increase exports, the TPP would also increase imports at probably a faster rate.
And those exports that it did increase, would they be at good prices, or would those prices be falling?
They would be probably at lower prices, but at what cost? I mean, the TPP would create a global race to the bottom. It would basically codify low wages, unsafe health and safety standards in factories overseas, in places like Vietnam, which is now considered the low-wage alternative to China, while at the same time undermining our own labor movement here in the U.S. I mean, since NAFTA and the global WTO, the U.S. has lost more than 5 million of its manufacturing jobs. That's 1 out of every 4 manufacturing jobs, while over 54,000 manufacturing plants have actually closed. And this has pushed down the real median wages to barely above the 1970s level. So yeah, you may be able to knock off a few cents from the products or food that you're purchasing, food that you don't know where it's coming from, or if it really meets U.S. standards. But it will also be harming people's jobs and wages here in the U.S. and overseas.
And there are small efforts that we try to make at the national or even at the local level to push back against the trends we're seeing, including requirements to buy American or labeling of products as renewable or sweat-free or produced with a living wage pay for workers. All of these would run into to new problems with this agreement, if I understand correctly.
Yes, that's exactly right. The U.S. would not be allowed to keep its Buy America policy, something that is supported across the board from both sides of the aisle. The U.S. government must, under the TPP, if it's passed, the U.S. government would have to give all companies operating in a TPP country the same access to U.S. procurement contracts as domestic companies. So basically that would mean that if a Chinese government-owned firm sets up in Vietnam, that they would be able to get equal treatment as American firms in getting contracts for goods and services bought by the government and paid for with our tax dollars. But it even goes further than that. I mean, the U.S. government can't give preferential treatment under the TPP, to sweat-free businesses, to women-owned businesses, minority-owned, environmentally friendly businesses. It would level the playing field, but again, at what cost?
At all kinds of costs. So now if the U.S. Olympic uniforms are made in China, they can just say, well, we were required to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And presumably the Pentagon will be required to buy its weapons from China if they're selling the weapons cheapest.
Yep, exactly.
Could result in some interesting politics. I realize that most Americans probably have no idea this is happening or what's in it to any sort of detail, which is why I appreciate you coming on this show. But as far as you are aware, if we had a direct democracy, if we had a public referendum, is there any chance this would pass?
Well, I would imagine that if people knew about the TPP, that they would be up in arms and that this would not be able to pass, just because once you tell people what's going on, I've been going, around the U.S. talking to people about the TPP and how it affects their everyday lives, like I'm doing right now. As soon as they hear about this, they are horrified, and they can't wait to take action and tell their members of Congress that this is not good for them. This is not good for their district. This is not good for the U.S. This isn't good for the world. So I would, based on the people that I've been talking to about this, I would assume that if this were a direct democracy, this would not go through.
You've got, I think, a huge coalition of groups aligned against this. What kind of organizations are working against the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Most recently, we signed onto a letter, public citizen signed onto a letter with over 400 civil society organizations representing 15 million Americans. And we sent this letter to Congress on March 4th, and it outlined the shared expectations for our 21st century trade agreement. And among those signatory groups, there were over 100 national organizations and nearly 300 regional, state, and local organizations. And these are groups that are representing all sorts of different issue areas. There were labor groups, environmental groups, family farm, consumer, faith, youth, public health, Native American and other indigenous groups, and human rights constituencies, democracy and transparency. Basically, everybody, once they hear about the U.S. trying to sign on to the TPP, they are up in arms. This affects so many different issue areas that there are a vast number of groups representing different issue areas that are against the TPP, as it is right now.
Your letter to Congress spells out what you think such an agreement should look like, the positive things that should be in it. Is this accepting the idea that such an agreement is needed, but it should be radically different, or do we perhaps not need the thing at all?
Well, we're working in a new global arena, so some sort of trade agreement is necessary, and whether we want it to or not, it's going to happen. But Public Citizen is not against trade. We want responsible trade that is for all of us and not just the 1%. So we do want a trade agreement, but we want one that prioritizes human and labor rights, that has respect for local government goals and the procurement policies that deliver them. We want a trade agreement that does not elevate corporations to equal terms with government. We want an agreement that allows for protection of food sovereignty and maintains access to affordable medication. An agreement should safeguard against currency manipulation and also allow space for robust financial regulations and public services. Otherwise, we'll end up just back a couple years ago with another global financial meltdown. And we also want a trade agreement that improves consumer and environmental standards. That's something that is definitely needed, especially as climate change is occurring.
It seems like NAFTA on steroids, as you've characterized it, and it seems very similar to other agreements that we've seen advanced and even passed while Obama's been president, and it seems to not change much as we go from Bush to Clinton to Bush to Obama. There seems to be this facade of supposed disagreement, of partisan debate, of one party that's more for corporate trade and another party that's supposedly for labor rights and environmental protections. But when you look at the agreements that are created, we seem to have more damage done when the Democrats have the White House and the Congress. Am I right, or is there some significant partisan divide in terms of what's actually being done in Washington?
Well, basically, the TPP and free trade agreement is bipartisan in a sense that some Democrats support it, some don't, and same on the other side. Some Republicans support this and some don't.
Have Congress members seen it? Do they know what's in it? I mean, is this like voting for the Patriot Act based on what they heard on TV, or have they read the thing?
Most members of Congress have not read it. It is extraordinarily difficult to actually get a copy of the text. Basically, members would have to go into the U.S. Trade Representative's office, go into a room, no windows, they can't have any writing implementations, they can't bring any cell phones or cameras in, and they can read the text, but then then when they leave, they can't talk about it with anybody else. So they have to jump through various hoops even to be able to do that. So most members of Congress, the vast majority, have not seen the text, and a lot of them don't even know about the TPP.
So if we want to stop this thing, we need to build up pressure rather soon now. What are people doing? What can people be doing? What have you seen groups, including Public Citizen, working on thus far? And what can an individual do, or what can a local organization do to put some significant weight into exposing this thing and stopping it?
One of the best things that citizens can do is schedule an in-district meeting with their representative. This is something very easy to do. Just contact your member of Congress and tell them about the TPP and what parts of it you're opposed to, what you would like a trade agreement to look like going forward. Tell them that this is something that's important to you. Get your friends together and go together. The more people who talk to their members of Congress about this, the better. Writing letters is also a good idea, but really getting that face-to-face time, scheduling those in-district meetings is wonderful. And if you would like to get more information on the TPP, find some talking points, then you can definitely go to tradewatch.org or www.citizenstrade.org. and there are some talking points there, as well as contact information if you would like some help in setting up these in-district meetings or figuring out what you're going to say. Also, I will be going around and doing some more of what we call the TPP Roadshow, public education on the TPP, so that more people learn about this. And if you would like to host an event, you can contact me. I would love to talk to you about this. So really, and talk to your friends. The biggest obstacle I've had to organizing against the TPP is that people don't know about it. So the more people who know about it, the better. Getting out the word is key. Talking to members of Congress is key.
And if people want to hold a public event, you might be available and able to come speak at it.
Yes, of course. I'd love to.
We've been speaking with Lacey Kohlmoos. She is the senior field organizer for Global Trade Watch at Public Citizen. The website, again, is tradewatch.org. Make sure everyone who did not hear this program knows what we said today. You can send them to the website of Talk Nation Radio to listen to it, and you can hold a public event, and Lacey Kohlmoos will come speak to your group. Lacey, thanks for being on Talk Nation Radio.
Thank you. This has been fun.
Hundreds gathered in Dallas, Texas last week to reject the Bush library, and 3 went to jail. I flew from Dallas to Syracuse, where hundreds protested Obama's drone murder program, and 32 went to jail, some of them risking major jail time because they violated a protective order that the commander of a U.S. military base gained to protect himself from nonviolent peace activists. Another drone protester in Missouri, Brian Terrell, is just finishing a 6-month sentence. Climate activist Tim DeChristopher just got out. The people locked in Guantanamo are refusing to eat, and groups around the world are making plans to fast with them. The people of Vieques, Puerto Rico, are rallying to demand that the U.S. military truly depart their island 10 years after having agreed to do so. Big plans are being made to rally for Bradley Manning on June the 1st in the lead-up to his trial, which begins June 3rd. This week, I'm heading to the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee's meeting in North Carolina, after which, just over in Tennessee, 3 courageous activists go on trial facing major prison time for having entered and protested a nuclear weapons facility. On July 28, 2012, Michael Wally, age 63, Megan Rice, age 82, and Greg Bjortje Obed, aged 57, entered the Y-12 nuclear weapons plant in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, undetected. You can't walk down the street without being filmed, but these 3 senior citizens were able to walk at night right up to a nuclear weapons facility. They hung up banners that read, "Transform now plowshares," and "Swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks." They strung up red tape. They hammered on the cornerstone of the newly built, highly enriched uranium manufacturing facility. They splashed human blood and left 4 spray-painted tags on the recent construction, which read, "Woe to the empire of blood. The fruit of justice is peace. Work for peace, not for war. And plowshares, please, Isaiah." When finally confronted by guards, they offered the guards bread and roses. They sang while forced to kneel for a long period of time. The revolution will not be televised, but it will be on Talk Nation Radio. This is Talk Nation Radio. I'm David Swanson. Take action at rootsaction.org. All past shows can be heard at davidswanson.org. Talk Nation Radio is produced in Charlottesville, Virginia, and syndicated by Pacifica Network. If you are listening to a non-profit station, please support that station. Talk Nation Radio is funded by contributors at davidswanson.org. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Until next time.